Hi everybody, to start this video I'm going to play this short clip of this young Palestinian girl. I think she's 10 years old, and she has a message for the people of the world, and especially people like people in nations like Britain, the leaders of Britain, Nadine, Abdul Latif.
My name is Nadine Abdul Latif and I'm 10 years old and from Gaza. I learned English from YouTube, and as what happened last night when I heard, not last night, like what happened before the explosion, at night, I was really scared, but I hid it so my brother can get scared, because I want him to feel he's safe in this big war that he still is understanding. And I have a lot of fears, but I'm trying to make my only fear is Allah. So yeah. And about all of those stuff that's happening and how I became viral because just from a video, I am happy, but I'm also more happy that I made my message to out there, like in Canada and Britain and Paris, that they can hear what's happening in Gaza, because it's not fair for anyone to live in this. This is not safe for anyone. Kids and everything here are crying. Mothers can't handle. There's lots of mothers who lost their kids, and lots of kids who lost their mothers and parents. And yeah, and my message to the world is to stop selling weapons to the occupiers, because they use those weapons for bad, not for good, and we don't deserve this.
So in previous videos, in her original video, Nadine was expressing a lot of emotion, and there were a lot of tears about the condition of her nation and her people. And we cannot forget that Israel leaders will not even recognise that Palestinian people have a right to call the lands that they live on, their ancestral lands, as a nation. Apparently the only nation that can be in the lands of Palestine is Israel. So I've been supporting Palestine for a long time, and I've been on so many demonstrations over the years, and every demonstration that I've been on has also included the people that I call true Jews, who always march in solidarity and always gave speeches against the brutality of the Zionist regime against Palestinian people, and even against those Jews, true Jews, who do not support Zionism. And unfortunately, those people very rarely receive any publicity whatsoever. So here we have Rabbi Yisroel, Dovid, Weiss, and you can see the true Jews condemning the Zionist actions.
Despite the reality of the existence of Palestinians in Gaza being reduced constantly in the mainstream to numbers, numbers killed, number of houses destroyed, numbers
With the help of the Almighty, I plead to the Almighty that He should give me His words, that I may sanctify His name, and so bring truth to the world and bring peace to the world. Amen. Assalamu alaikum. As you see, we have a delegation of rabbis and rabbinical students who have come here to join in solidarity. Jewish people that we are carrying with us till today. We have hundreds of thousands of Jews there in the occupied Palestine and around the world who demonstrate daily. Literally hundreds of thousands in the streets of Jerusalem. Every year we go out, and every year these Jewish people are being brutally beaten. Our rabbis are being assassinated. Our children are arrested because they refuse to serve in the IDF. Boys and girls who turn 17 become automatic criminals because they refuse to serve in their mandatory military service in the IDF. But we don't give up because we give our lives already for 2,000 years by the Crusades and the Inquisition. We are ready to die for our religion because that's what we're living for. And our religion says thou shalt not steal. Our religion says that you should be compassionate. Just as God is compassionate, you should be compassionate. The Torah tells us and warns us, never forget good that has been done to you. Through the years, when we were living in Europe, there was the Crusades and the Inquisition and so much other trials and tribulations. And it was the Muslim and Arab countries that took us in and embraced us and gave us a home, and we flourished. And our greatest rabbis came from these beautiful countries. Whether it was in Turkey, whether it was in Iran, whether it was Lebanon, Iraq, Egypt, or Palestine, there is where we flourished and put out the greatest rabbis in Jewish communities. Why? There was this distinct difference between Islam and Judaism. There's a distinct difference in our religions. But one thing is obvious, that it wasn't an impediment to coexistence. This has nothing to do with a religious conflict. That's a dirty, disgusting ploy of Zionism. This is a way of Zionism, their ploy, that they masquerade in a religion to intimidate and silence the voice of righteous people who want to stand up for the Palestinian suffering. So they declare you are anti-Semitic. They declare that our rabbis and the hundreds of thousands of Jews around the world who are practicing the religion truly, as God commanded us, that we are self-hating Jews, that we are anti-Semitic, and therefore they have to beat us and murder our rabbis on the streets. But if you would like to see these pictures, you have to come to our site, NKUSA. Why? Because the mainstream media doesn't seem to have cameras for this. They don't seem to be able to cover what's happening to the Jewish populace that's been existing for hundreds of years in Palestine. Oh yes, they'll deliver you pictures of Palestine. They'll show you settlers. They'll show you pictures of their chief rabbi, that farce that they call a rabbinate, the Israeli rabbinate. They're rabbis who are masquerading in the cloth of holiness and that are oppressing the Palestinian people. They will ignore the fact that there is another rabbinate that was existing prior to their coming there. They will ignore the fact that there's a Jewish community that's thriving and living against their control, that's living in Mea Shearim, in the streets of Jerusalem. There are people that daily stand out on the street and demonstrate. There are people that do not take any medical aid from the Zionists. They refuse to serve in the army. They refuse. They're poor families, large families, and they don't take one penny from the Israeli government because they call it dirty money. They don't register by the Israeli government. These pictures you can see on the alternative media. Maybe Press TV will show it. Other television stations don't seem to know how to point the camera at these communities. Just like they don't know how to point the camera at the Palestinians anywhere. Not one single Israeli flag. It should be very puzzling. These people have private schooling that costs fortunes. They have kosher food that costs fortunes. They have to buy special clothing. Modest clothing for the women that you can't get off the rack in department stores. So why is it that if their lives are so given over to the religion, why aren't they supporting the Jewish state? Why aren't they there supporting the state of Israel? Why isn't there one flag of the state of Israel? Anybody with a little logic, with a little intelligence would ask that question. And they could ask these rabbis, and the answer would be because this is a rebellion against God. The Zionist state of Israel is a criminal entity. It's perpetrating crime, Nakba, atrocities, oppressing a people, godly creation, people that were created by God. How dare they do this in our name? We will never accept this. They have no right to use the Star of David or the name Israel, which is Jacob. We have stood from day one against the Zionist entity. Not only the occupation from 67, but its mere existence, which is a direct rebellion against God. This may be a little complicated, but the fact is that when we took the Torah from God 3,000 years ago, we were told that we have to be in a high level of holiness to be in the Holy Land. And the Jeremiah and Ezekiel, Isaiah warned the Jews that if we're not on that level, we will be banished and we were sent out with the destruction of the temple 2,000 years ago. And since they were under oath, a stringent oath by God not to return en masse, not to make a Jewish sovereignty, and we've respected this oath. Therefore, it is forbidden for Jews to have even 1 inch of Jewish sovereignty, even if it would not affect the lives of others, even in an uninhabited land, in a desolate land. So we oppose the state of Israel, even if the Palestinian people would say, okay, you can have part of it. It's not kosher. It's not halal. It's not acceptable according to the Jewish religion. And it's compounded on that is the fact that they created this rebellion against God on the heads and shoulders of the Muslim community and the Palestinian community and the Jewish community that was there. It is not acceptable. It will never be acceptable. And in the Torah it states, clearly, it says, why are you rebelling against me? It will not be successful. This state will end. This state will end. We just don't know when. We pray to God.
So, that was Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Weiss. And, as I say, these Jews, true Jews, Jews not Zionists, always were marching. And, you know, I'm going right back to the 90s, the 80s and 90s and on. They were always there, and they were never featured in the press. And in fact, most of our demonstrations, the marches I went on, which were mostly Muslim people, and these true Jews took part in them. So the Zionists like to talk about God, and they like to justify their actions on religious texts and even quote the Bible, though their own text is the Torah. And these Jews, Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Weiss is a Torah Jew. So, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And God said, let there be light. And what do we need light for? Well, certainly you do need light to read. And you also need guidance in order to understand what it is we're reading. And guidance is for what? For balance, so that we have a balanced approach, a balanced thinking. a balanced understanding. So in any truth there is both good and bad, and it's about finding a balance between the two, which is the righteous path, you see. So these Jews are in the true sense of Yahweh, which is the path of righteousness, the path of doing right. And Yahweh is a very forgiving entity, God, in that we are here to learn, and we do make errors, and we do find ourselves, we are led astray sometimes by life, by events, by other people, by misinterpretations, confusions, by persecution. People are led astray from the path of righteousness, and we do wrong things in the eyes of God. And then as we learn and we understand, we start to try to live right, if we have faith in God, in the sense of we don't want to upset God. We don't want to make God angry or enraged. We would like to be acceptable before God, because we have faith in God, and God is our strength, you see. Now, I'll leave a video under this video of my own experience of God, and I must say I have struggled with that concept throughout my life, and struggled to try to live accordingly, and I can't say I've always been successful. I consider myself quite a bit of a failure, really, in terms of living a holy life. And a part of that failure is the fact that I'm living in this world, and it is very, very difficult as a single entity and not really affiliated with any particular faith, but finding an allegiance with the true Jews and the true Christians and the true Muslims, and finding that my life is a microcosm of what these three faiths are experiencing in terms of the true followers, that we are all persecuted. True Christians are persecuted by the mainstream Christianity as put forward, by evangelicalism or Roman Catholicism or British Protestantism. These are very far removed from the actual teachings of Jesus, and just in the same way as the actual teachings of Prophet Muhammad are very far removed from the beliefs and faith of extremist Muslims. So that Muslims called the Daesh, and the same as for Jews, in terms of the Zionists, which are an extremist element, who are the equivalent to the Daesh. And equivalent, in terms of Christianity, to the people that orchestrated the Spanish Inquisition. Because these extremes will happen in life among humanity. And Jesus asked us to be vigilant. These are a afflictions. People are afflicted with these kind of extremist ideologies, these extremist beliefs. It was recognised thousands of years ago as an affliction, again, of consciousness, that certain people are afflicted in the sense they have low empathy, they consider themselves superior, or because they feel inferior, so they strive to be superior, they strive to trample down on the people that make them feel inferior, you see. Now, I can look at Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Weiss and feel inferior to him because he's such a holy person, and even though I have been blessed by witnessing an event of light being and receiving the message of universal law of abundance and compassion, nonetheless I feel humble before truly holy people, because he is on a higher level than me. And the same with, you know, true faith among imams and Christian leaders, you know, Christian people who have devoted their lives to prayer and doing good things and really striving to live fully by what they understand as the teachings of God in a balanced way of compassion, you know, which isn't to go around judging people, or because, you know, Rabbi Weiss doesn't go around saying, I am superior to you and one day you are going to be my slave, which is what the Zionists are saying. Okay, that is exactly what they're saying, that everybody who isn't a Zionist Jew is basically cattle and should be a slave, will one day be a slave to the Zionists, and this is what they hope for, that they will one day fully own and control and occupy every part of Palestine, parts of Syria, parts of Egypt, parts of Iraq, Lebanon, even parts of Saudi Arabia, and I think even a part of Iran they want to lay claim to ultimately, are all going to, you know, this is all going to belong to the Zionists, and everybody who isn't a Jew within those lands, a Zionist Jew, will be a slave to the Zionists. So you're dealing with a very narcissistic ideology here that's calling itself Jewish, perhaps in the same way as the Ku Klux Klan, for example, called themselves Christians. Now, I'm not saying that that there aren't some genuine Christians who are part of extremist organisations because they're confused. But, you know, Yahweh forgives confusion. When the people stop being confused, you know, that's all you have to do, is stop being confused, recognise that, well, actually, you know, we've done wrong things in our state of confusion, and to try to make amends for those, and that we do live by forgiveness, because as Jesus said, an eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind. So we can't go around, you know, persecuting people. Oh, you did this to me, you did that to me. At the end of the day, it is best to forgive, because we've all done wrong things and we all need to be forgiven. And as you give, so shall you receive. And so, you know, while it's easy for people like me to condemn Israel, the Israeli government, you know, and it's easy for people to express the anger and hatred about what's going on. But I think strength is in actually pushing that to one side and recognising the light here, the light of these good people, these Torah Jews, the light of the good people of Palestine, who haven't done anything wrong. They don't own nuclear weapons. They have no army that we could recognise according to 21st century standards of what an army is. The rockets that they fire into Israel, which all violence is condemned, but at the end of the day, war is war, isn't it? When a nation is being attacked, regardless of the fact that the Zionists don't consider Palestine to be a nation, nonetheless, it is a nation. Legally, Palestine is recognised by the United Nations and the International Criminal Court of Justice as a nation. And as a nation, when their people are attacked, when people are attacked, as happened again very recently, then what do we expect? Of course, there's going to be a response to that. There's going to be a reply. Because it is a natural response. People have a right to defend themselves. Now, we've all heard Biden explain, oh, well, you know, Israel has a right to defend itself. But the aggressor, this cannot apply to an aggressor. The idea that an aggressor has a right to defend themselves. An aggressor will defend themselves when the person they're attacking or the people they're attacking then respond to that attack and attack back. But to do nothing, because sometimes to do nothing is to leave the victim of attack even more demoralised and then at risk of even worse abuse. So there has to be some show of that. Look, if you're going to attack me, we are going to hurt you. All right, you are not going to get hurt anywhere nearly as bad as we, the victims of your attack, are going to be hurt. But nonetheless, you have to know that, you know, you are going to be experiencing some pain yourself here. But you see, the Zionists don't mind. They're quite happy to let Hamas send across its makeshift rockets. And when Israeli people get injured and people die, then they feed on that, you see. They drink that blood to justify, look, see, now we're going to bomb even more buildings and we're going to kill, you know, you've killed 10 Israeli people, we're going to kill 100 Palestinians, and you respond again and we'll kill now 150 Palestinians, including children, because they use that to justify. And you know, people say, well, what can we do to stop this? How can we end this situation? Well, we're never going to end it through war, through violence or through hate. We can, the only way is to move towards a new beginning, because in the beginning, the ending has happened because there's a new beginning. Something new happens, and that then becomes old hat. That brings an end to Zionism. because it is a total imposition. It's a usurpation. They have been running a protection racket. They've been running it for over 100 years, feeding on the suffering of Jews. It is well documented, even right going back to Russia, that the Zionists were actually, and they've been doing it again with Trump, under the banner of Trump, covertly feeding hatred against Jews among Trump supporters. We witnessed it. Even Trump, a Zionist, being supported by people who walk around with torches to defend a statue, saying Jews will not replace us, who attack Jewish synagogues and who attack Jewish cemeteries. But these people support Trump ardently, who is a Zionist, because the Zionists depend on anti-Semitism. You see, they rely on anti-Semitism because that's how they got Israel in the first place, was through attacks against Jews and ultimately through Hitler. And many people are aware that, you know, Hitler himself was covertly supported and funded by Zionists of America, who were all part of the eugenicist movement, of which Bill Gates is part of, Epstein was part of, this eugenicist ideology that now is all wrapped up in the new technology that they want to roll out. So I think it is time to look at the word Israel. What does it actually mean? Well, Israel actually originates from Jacob wrestling with God. Well, the angel in question is referred to as man and God in Genesis, while Hosea references an angel. Okay, so because Jacob, who is the son of Isaac, grandson of Jacob, grandson of Abraham, and so he was then given the name Israel, etymologized contends with God or wrestled with God. Okay, and so, you know, where does Abraham actually originate from? And Canaan was known as the supreme god of the Canaanites in the mythology of the ancient Near East. And it was the Canaanites who became the Hebrews, who later fled from Egypt, who were basically condemned to servitude or slavery in Egypt. And who were the Canaanites? The Canaanites were people who lived in the land of Canaan, an area which, according to ancient texts, may have included parts of modern-day Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Syria and Jordan. Much of what scholars know about the Canaanites comes from records left by the people they came into contact with. Some of the most detailed surviving records come from the state of Amira in Egypt and from the Hebrew Bible. Additional information comes from excavations or archaeological sites that the Canaanites are thought to have lived in. Scholars doubt that the Canaanites were ever politically united into a single kingdom. In fact, archaeological excavations indicate that the Canaanites were actually made up of different ethnic groups. Canaan was not made up of a single ethnic group, but consisted of a population whose diversity may be hinted at by the great variety of burial customs and cultic structures. So, these were the Canaanites, okay? And we think there is a thought that these come from the land of Canaan, or the Canaanites are considered to be a root of Cain. So he was called Israel, but Isra also has another meaning. Okay, so Isra and Mirage. So Isra and Mirage refer to the Prophet Muhammad, to the night journey that he took a single night around the year 621, and it was a physical and a spiritual journey, and he's said to have travelled on the back of a winged steed Burak to the farthest mosque, you see, and the farthest mosque, and then from there ascends to heaven, to the Miraj, through the 7 heavens and the 7 hells. And so Masjid al-Aqsa was the farthest mosque. Now, actually, in that time, because Prophet Muhammad had not, Islam wasn't widely established at that time, there was no mosque or temple at that place where the Al-Aqsa Mosque now stands. It had traditionally been, the Temple Mount of the Temple of Solomon, which was destroyed, and there had been another Jewish synagogue temple erected there, which was then also destroyed by other invaders. So at that time, Isra referred to the furthest temple, the temple where the prophets prayed, and Islam fully incorporates the Torah, is based on all the prophets of the in Christianity are in the Old Testament, and also Jesus is included in those prophets, and he's recognised by Islam as a very important prophet of Allah, okay, which is just the Arabic word for God, as the Judaic people name God Yahweh. So, and that is why the Al-Aqsa Mosque is a very important, well, it's the 3rd most holiest site in Islam, you see. So it is a very important place, because especially for Muslims in terms of pilgrimage as well, because that's the place where Prophet Muhammad went to on his night journey, Isra, the furthest mosque. And that is what makes Israel an important place for Muslim people, because their faith is actually rooted. It is a root of, it is a branch of David, okay? It is a branch of the Star of David. It is a branch of Judaism, in the same way that Jesus and Christianity became a branch of Judaism. We're talking about a family here. We're talking about Jesus, who was rejected by the Romanized Pharisees of his times, the Romanized Jews, the Romanized rabbis, who Rabbi Weiss was explaining, you know, these Zionist rabbis are the same. They're no different. These are the same. This is the same consciousness that is now judging against true Jews. Is the same consciousness that was judging against Jesus, and the same consciousness that judged against Prophet Muhammad, even though Prophet Muhammad went to Israel explaining what he'd experienced in his vision, and he was rejected. You know, and that is a very hard thing. I mean, he was very fortunate that he had people around him that stood by him. Unfortunately, in my case, I just have not had that. I haven't had anybody who stood by me. You know, even though I've written and asked for help and, you know, gone to the churches, even written to Jews, even gone to the mosques, because I did also have a dream of Prophet Muhammad, and I was, you know, there is a new way forward, there is a new message, you see, and the people don't want to have the new message. And that has been the case with the Zionists, is that they don't want anything new, you see. They want to stick to their old ways of crime, basically. They wish to be able to commit crime with impunity and be above the law, and that, you know, Israel considers itself above the law, and they are at liberty to ignore the sovereign laws of any nation, and also they do not consider themselves under rule, that they have to follow international law. They can ignore international law. So when we get into Tzedakah, Tzedakah is a Hebrew word meaning righteousness, but commonly used to signify charity, and that's very similar to the word zakah, which means to give charity. According to Muslims, you know, they must give a portion of their wealth after they've bought their food and whatever. They give a portion of that to charity. I think, is it 2.5% or something, 2.5% of one's wealth after they've tended to all their own needs. They give 2.5%. In a way, it is a form of tax, but actually it is a duty. It's considered a duty, and I have explained that in a piece that I've written recently, that, you know, when people are very, very wealthy, they have a duty to give payment to help look after the workforce, the people that have created that wealth, because they've profited it, and they have a duty according to God, because as Jesus said, actually half the money belongs to God, you see. So no matter how rich one person gets, half of that money belongs to God, not that person. So what that person does with that money, you know, half of it should be given to God. Does that mean that they should give it to the church or to a synagogue or to a mosque? No, it means that half of their money goes to God, and we who believe in God ask ourselves, well, what would God spend this money on then? Well, obviously God loves all the little children. Jesus explained that to us. So God would spend the money on looking after people, looking after families, looking after women, providing hospitals, education, transport, housing, the things that people need in order to live a healthy and productive existence. So in a way, you're talking about the kind of welfare state that was set up in Britain that ran alongside capitalism, you know, business and enterprise, which is fair enough. You're talking about a balance here, a socio-capitalist society, so democratic socio-capitalism. It works because, you know, you can't say, well, you know, you can't be capitalist or you can't be socialist or you've just got to be socialist and you can't be capitalist. It's crazy. It's like saying you can only use one of your hands at any given time. No, the two hands work together, you see. So some people get very rich, and that's okay, because half of that money belongs to God. Okay? The richer people get, half the money belongs to God. Obviously, it's not talking, in that sense, referring to people who just, you know, got a few £100 at the end of the year left over. We're talking about people who are hugely wealthy, that the more and more wealth they acquire, the more and more of that, of their profits belong to God. So, you know, when it comes to somebody like, say, Bill Gates, and he's got billions, half of his wealth belongs to God as a duty. It's a duty to life, because God doesn't need money in particular, except to raise the children, except to bring people up out of misery and poverty, except to free slaves. But the Zionists, they want to make slaves. So the Tzedakah actually then is the true wrestling that is going on today under the Zionists. So under Zionist rule, this land that the Zionists are calling Israel is in fact Isratzedakah. Isratzedakah. That's the true name according to God. God's understanding of what is going on in that land that these people are saying, you know, is the land of Jacob. Because they are wrestling against righteousness. They are wrestling against faith. They are wrestling against charity and forgiveness. But they are actually wrestling against righteousness. That is what they are doing. And that is why this name Israel that they have given, calling themselves Israelis, they are Isratzedakah. Isratzedakah. Because they are wrestling against righteousness, against the law. And they have declared themselves above the law. Here we are. Israel declares it is above the law. Okay. Entitled to violate the sovereignty of foreign countries and is allowed to ignore the directive of international law in any field it desires. They are above the law. But the law is there to serve righteousness. So again, my explanation here, Isratzedakah, is what this land is under rule of the Zionists. So now we understand this, and don't forget as well that these people calling themselves Zionists, even that is a usurpation, because the true Zionists are Rastafarian. You know, go and listen to Bob Marley, a Rastafarian, and tell me where any of what that man what his life was devoted to, how any of it fits in with the concepts of these people calling themselves Zionists. They're not even Zionists. True Zionists are Rastafarian. Very peaceful people. Very righteous people. So, you know, and this is how we bring an end to this, you see. Now, people have said, you know, oh, I'm going to boycott Israel and we want sanctions against them. You know, look, my now deceased husband, he was Kurdish. He came from Tabriz, and which was part of Iran, but his people are Kurdish and he spoke Kurdish. And Saddam Hussein terribly attacked the Kurds, and you know, the horror of that chemical weapons attack against those people, I will never forget it. And I deeply disliked Saddam Hussein, and yet nonetheless I was out campaigning against the sanctions that were issued against Iraq, because I understood that the most of the Iraqi people didn't support Saddam Hussein. A very large amount of people didn't support him, and everybody was suffering. And that's the problem with sanctions, you see, because as Rabbi Weiss here explains, there's hundreds of thousands, he showed the picture, hundreds of thousands come out regularly to demonstrate against the Zionists and what they're doing. But nobody hears about it. And those people help the Palestinian people. They really do. And so sanctions and boycotts against Israel or stop buying things will make them suffer. And then more Palestinian people will suffer as well. And why should we punish the good? Because we spend so much time focusing on the bad that we're going to punish the good people. Because it's them that will suffer the most. Because all the evil people, the non-righteous people, they happen to be the richest people, so they're not going to suffer through the sanctions. It's always the poorest, most vulnerable people, the most oppressed people who suffer most under sanctions and under boycotts. So what are the other alternatives then? Well, we could use weapons, we could declare war against Israel. Well, that's not going to help, is it? The only way is to stop calling that nation Israel until these people are in power. Okay? Is to start calling them for exactly what they are. Isratzedakah. Isratzedakah. That is what it is. Wrestling with righteousness, wrestling against peace, wrestling against faith, against forgiveness. And the only way is for the people of every nation. Look, marching through the street, I didn't go on any demonstrations this year. I was too upset. I've been on so many. I'm just so sick of it. The uselessness of it. The half-hearted, oh, well, you know, I went on the march and waved the flag. I did write a very strong letter to my MP. Which is, again, what use is it? But we, the peoples of our nations, we need to stand firm and demand that the Israel lobby is kicked out of Parliament, that the Israel lobby is banned, the Israel embassy is closed down, packed up. Because it isn't Israel, it's Isratzedakah. It's an enemy of humanity, an enemy of Islam, an enemy of Christianity, and an enemy of Judaism. And they are funding and they are behind some deeply disturbing things that are happening in our country, in every country right now. Deeply, deeply disturbing people they hang around. Like, for example, Epstein, who we, according to the evidence, the guy was working for Mossad. They trade in filth. They own politicians through filth, leverage by placing criminals into power, people who abuse children. They place into power so that they'll have a yes person. A person will say, yes, 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 you can have Jerusalem. Yes, go and take the Golan Heights. Yes, we will applaud your right to defend yourself. Israel, Isratzedakah. But we the people, this is our land. Why is it that the Israel lobby has more say over Parliament and British politics than we the British people? Look what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, because he, like Rabbi Dovid Weiss here, spoke up for Palestinian people's human rights. Look what happened to him. From what did they call themselves? The Jewish body of something that slandered Jeremy Corbyn and all the Jewish supporters of the Labour Party who don't support Zionism were all declared anti-Semitic because they don't support Zionism. That we had a Prime Minister in David Cameron who says, I am a Zionist, who Theresa May stands there with the British flag on one side and the Zionist flag on the other side. And the same in America, where, members of Congress all have to swear an allegiance to Israel. No, this isn't Israel. This is Isratzedakah, under the rule of tyranny. And this tyranny is being spread around the world. And this tyranny has come to Britain in the form of our present government, who actually has more in common with Netanyahu than it does with the British people and Jesus and Islam and true Jews. And that is why, expressing hatred against these people calling themselves Zionists is an absolute waste of time. We need to express our love. Where it is our love that is being oppressed. We have a right to love. We have a right to joy. And we have a right to celebrate. Now, I know that right was taken away from me. The right to love God. The right to express joy and to celebrate the events of light being that I witnessed, and receiving that message of universal law, of abundance in compassion, that upholds all our human rights. Okay? No, I wasn't allowed to celebrate that. I was persecuted. I actually turned against myself. I actually started to believe that I was mad. And I haven't lived a happy life. I've been confused. I've been abused. I went into Islam and found it was all being radicalised and had to leave that. Because it was being radicalised, and it was being radicalised by our government, MI6, and its operatives. And, you know, I don't fit in with Rastafarianism really, because for a start, I'm a white English person, you know, and I know Rastafarianism doesn't discriminate, but, you know, culturally, my culture is within Celtic Christianity. That's where my culture is rooted. Pre-Roman Christianity. I'm talking about Celtic Christianity and the Celtic cross, the 4 equinoxes within the circle of time, of the solar year. That's my faith. That's where I'm coming from. And I, as a Celtic Christian, will stand by these true Jewish people with love and compassion and respect and with humility. And I will help them as much as I can. How can I help them? I can help them by making of this video. I can help the Muslim people, the children of Palestine, by standing with the good people of Israel, who are true Israeli people, in the sense of they stand with God, okay? They aren't wrestling against righteousness. They wrestle against oppression. And it is Isratzedakah. You know, people can call themselves anything they like, but if what they call themselves doesn't match up with the truth of who and what they are, then they have no right to that name. And the Zionists have no right to the title Zionist, because they are not Zionists, they are not Rastafarian. And yet, even to the Zionists, people might say, oh, well, you know, I hate Zionists. No, I don't hate Zionists. I hate what they do. I hate what they believe. I hate their lies. I hate their crimes. As I loathe that of everybody, of any faith or none. But there's always a way forward, that every person in the land they call Israel, now calling themselves a Zionist, every person calling themselves a Zionist in terms of the usurpation of Judaism, they have an opportunity to become a true Zionist and go and join the Rastafarians. You see, give up alcohol, live righteously, give up all animal products. If you're prepared to do that, and live with respect for the law, because if you're a Rastafarian, you honour God's law, universal law of abundance and compassion that upholds human rights, and every person is equal in the eyes of the law. Of course, not every individual is equal to another, but in the eyes of the law they are, whether they're a child or whether they're 90 years old. It don't make no difference. They are all equal in the eyes of the law. Which means they have equal rights to justice. And of course, it's taken into account how the law applies to a child, how the law applies to a grown adult. The law, Yahweh, takes everything into account. And that is something that is not happening in this world. And it is despicable that we're being shown a one-sided picture. And this one child has spoken out, and they've shown us this one child. But who the media have covered Dovid Weiss, Rabbi Dovid Weiss here. It is up to us to demand that this faction of haters who absolutely hate Palestinian people who think that these so-called Zionists, the Isratzedakahs, should be owning the whole of Palestine and should be able to do whatever they like and go and invade a mosque while people are praying during the holy month of Ramadan, knowing full well what it's going to cause. Because with every violent acts of violence, these get more and more money. And one thing again, which I will say to all of you alternative media people out there who are covering this, not one of you have ever mentioned the Gaza gas and oil, okay, that is there right on Gaza's doorstep in the sea, on the coast of Gaza, off the coast of Gaza, the gas and oil that Israel wants to get its hands on. That's why Gaza is separated. That is why it's totally persecuted. That's why the Isratzedakahs want Gaza emptied of Palestinians so they can get their hands on that gas, and they will not allow the people of Palestine to profit from developing and exploiting that resource. You know, this isn't about religion. Religion's the cover, the veneer, as Rabbi Dovid rightly explains. It's about land, it's about money, it's about resources. It's about one foreign group of people, invaders, colonisers, stepping into another nation. They were given a piece of land, unlawfully I would say, but the world agreed to it. And from there, they have committed crime after crime after crime, and they have profited from those crimes. And it's time for that to end. I demand that the Israel lobby is kicked out of Parliament, and that Britain ceases all diplomatic relations with Isratzedakah until that time, as it can truly be called Israel, a holy land. And in a holy land, the Jewish people, the true Jewish people, the Christian people, the Muslim people will live together as one people. They will live peacefully, they will have their independent faiths, and they will respect one another because they recognise that they are three brothers, three sisters, three families, all from the same tree, branches from the same tree, and they will be an example to this world, a light to humanity, that it can be done. Love can survive in this world. And if it doesn't, well, you've got the Zionist plan, the so-called Zionist plan. They're not Zionists, okay? They are Isratzedakahs. Against righteousness, the anti-righteous. And they've got a very nice plan. And again, I'll leave you the link, explains fully their plan for the world. Living in their technocracy, with their transhumanism and AI, and everybody, you know, chipped. You want to live in that world? You want to be born in an artificial, you want to come back in through an artificial womb? Because the very last thing they can take off you is a living mother. So, you know, you think about it, humanity, because you will be coming back, and you will be coming back to inhabit the world that you left behind. So you either stand up for today for what is right, or accept your faith. Accept your fate. It's time. It's time we recognise the reality of quantum energy. It is time that we recognise the truth. And it's time that we started living by it. And it is time that we started calling a spade a spade. Isratzedakah. Okay? Isratzedakah. That's what you are. So-called Zionists, anti-righteous, the anti-righteous. Shall we come and attack you? Shall we come and rob you? No. Shall we offer you a chance to repent and make amends and offer forgiveness? Yes, that's what the good people are offering. And it's your choice to take it. But until righteousness, I'm sorry, everywhere is war. Everywhere is war. While ever this world stands by the unrighteous, while this world stands by and supports crime and criminals, and they oppress, while ever this world oppresses the good righteous people, look how they outnumber. A few hundred, a small group of men against thousands. Look at your numbers, people. Stand up for love. Rise up for love. Stand by the true Zionists. Stand by the Rastafarians. Stand by the true Jews. Stand by the true Christians. The true Hindus. The people who truly love God. We have the same thing in common. We have our love. Our love is a strength. And we, humanity, are a diverse species. And that diversity is our wealth. But the so-called Zionists, the anti-righteous, they want to deny, they want to rob us of our diversity. They want to make every country a mirror of each other. We're all going to be corporate farms. Every country the same chips, the same passports. We've all got all vaccine passports. We have a right to our diversity. We are created as a diverse species. And that is our learning, our lesson for these last few thousand years has to be how to live with love, how to raise our children in love. That to recognise that our differences are like the colours of a rainbow. There are no sharp dividing lines between the colours, but the colours still stand in their own right, because that's the way of universal love and law. When we live by the law, everything becomes right. When we just love, when we stop hating and we just love, when we stand up righteously and defend love. And we have a right to defend love from hate. And we have a right to defend our parliament, to defend our nation from the hate of the Isratzedakah lobby.